My name is Hannah, and I'm 32. I stood in the glowing banquet hall of my sister-in-law Bianca's wedding rehearsal dinner, clutching a small gift, my heart racing. I'd spent weeks picking my dress, hoping to fit into James's aristocratic family. But as I scanned the tables, my stomach dropped. No place setting for me. Bianca smirked from the head table. "Oh, darling," she purred. "We only reserved seats for important guests." The room tittered. "James," my husband just shrugged. "Don't make a scene, Hannah." I excused myself to freshen up my mind, already ticking. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Share where you're watching from in the comments. And if this resonates, please like and subscribe to hear how I turned the tables. I slipped into the hallway outside the banquet hall, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The air was cooler here, but my face still burned from Bianca's words. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. The clink of glasses and laughter from the dinner room felt like a world away. I wanted to scream, to march back in and demand an explanation, but my legs felt heavy-rooted. How had I ended up here, invisible in my own husband's family? I thought back to the first time I met Bianca 2 years ago at a family dinner in their sprawling estate. I'd worn my favorite sweater, soft and blue, thinking it was charming. She'd raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with honey. "Teaching must be so quaint, Hannah. Do you ever get bored?" James had chuckled, brushing it off as her sense of humor. I'd laughed too, ignoring the sting, wanting to belong. Now, standing in this hallway, that moment felt like a warning I'd missed. I opened my eyes and noticed a young woman in a server's uniform hovering nearby, holding a tray with a single glass of water. Her name tag read Ellie. She looked about 19, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes cautious but kind. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, like she was afraid of being overheard. I nodded, taking the glass, my fingers trembling. "Thanks," I mumbled, sipping the water to hide how shaken I felt. Ellie glanced back toward the banquet hall, then leaned closer. "She was awful to me earlier," she whispered. "Yelled at me for setting an extra fork wrong. Like it was the end of the world." I looked at her, surprised. So Bianca's venom wasn't just for me. It was a small comfort, but it didn't ease the knot in my chest. "She's good at making people feel small," I said, my voice barely audible. Ellie nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I've seen her kind before. Watch yourself." Her words hung in the air as she slipped back to work, leaving me alone again. I set the glass on a side table and paced, my mind racing. I needed to talk to James to understand why he'd let Bianca humiliate me in front of everyone. I straightened my dress, smoothed my hair, and headed back toward the dinner, my heart pounding. The hallway opened into the banquet hall, where the chandeliers cast a golden glow over the tables. Guests were sipping wine, their voices a low hum of privilege and ease. I spotted James near the dessert table, laughing with his cousin Marcus, a tall man with a sharp jaw and sharper tongue. James looked so at home, his tie loosened, his smile wide. For a moment, I envied how easily he fit here, how he never seemed to notice the weight of their judgment. I walked over my steps, deliberate, trying to look composed. "James, can we talk?" I asked, touching his arm. He turned, his smile fading slightly. "Now," he said, glancing at Marcus, who raised an eyebrow. "It's important," I said, keeping my voice steady. Marcus smirked, swirling his wine glass. "Trouble in paradise already," he said, his tone teasing, but edged with something colder. I ignored him, pulling James a few steps away. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice low but urgent. "Bianca humiliated me, and you just..." shrugged. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Hannah? She's stressed about the wedding. It's her big day. Don't take it personally." His words hit like a slap. Don't take it personally. How could I not? I stared at him, searching his face for the man who'd promised to stand by me. "She said I wasn't important, James. In front of everyone. And you let her. My voice cracked and I hated it. Hated how vulnerable I sounded. He looked away, his jaw tight. You're making it bigger than it is, he said. Just let it go, okay? We're here to celebrate. Marcus, still within earshot, leaned in. Hannah, you've got to toughen up, he said, his voice laced with condescension. This family's not for the faint of heart. His words echoed Bianca's smirk, her dismissal, and something inside me twisted. I wanted to snap back to tell him I didn't need his advice, but the weight of the room pressed down on me. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the polished smiles, it all felt like a wall I couldn't break through. I turned away, my eyes stinging, and noticed a table near the entrance displaying family photos. There was James grinning in a suit surrounded by his parents and Bianca. I scanned the frames, my heart sinking. One photo caught my eye, a group shot from last Christmas, the whole family gathered around a massive tree. I was there, or I had been. My face was cropped out, just a sliver of my shoulder, visible next to James. It wasn't an accident. Someone had chosen this, had made sure I was erased. My breath caught, and I felt the room tilt. I wanted to grab the frame to hold it up and demand answers, but what would that prove? They'd laugh, or worse, pity me. I backed away, my hands shaking, and headed for the far corner of the room where the kitchen doors swung open and shut. I needed airspace, anything to stop the ache spreading through me. As I reached the corner, I saw Ellie again carrying a tray of empty plates. She met my eyes, and for a moment, I felt seen. Then she mouthed, "You okay?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Ellie's question hung in the air, and I wanted to answer to spill everything, but my throat tightened. I just nodded, forcing a weak smile. She hesitated, then slipped a folded napkin into my hand before disappearing through the kitchen doors. I unfolded it, my fingers clumsy. Scrawled in blue ink was a single line. "You're not alone. Meet me by the back exit at 9. My heart thudded. Was this a risk, trusting a stranger? But her kindness felt like the only anchor in this storm. I tucked the napkin into my purse and scanned the room, trying to blend into the shadows. The banquet hall buzzed with chatter, guests swirling around like they were in a choreographed dance I hadn't been taught. I spotted James again, now at a table with his father Richard, their heads bent close, laughing over some shared joke. The sight twisted something deep inside me. How could he be so at ease while I was unraveling? I decided to stay to prove I wasn't running away. I found a chair at a small table near the wall, half hidden by a towering floral arrangement. The seat was wobbly, the tablecloth slightly stained like an afterthought. I sat smoothing my dress and tried to look like I belonged. A couple at a nearby table glanced my way, their whispers sharp and quick. I caught the words "outsider" and "poor thing" before they turned away. My cheeks burned, but I kept my chin up, refusing to let them see me crumble. A woman approached, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo, her dress shimmering under the chandeliers. It was Aunt Clara, James's great-aunt, someone I'd only met once before. She had a soft smile, the kind that made you think she was harmless. "Hannah." "Dear," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "You look a bit lost over here." Her voice was warm, but there was a pity in her eyes that made my stomach churn. "I'm fine," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. She patted my hand, her rings cold against my skin. "Oh, you're a trooper," she said. "Bianca's so particular about her events, you know. She wanted everything, just so even the seating." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. She told the planner to keep the tables balanced aesthetically. "I'm sure it wasn't personal." Her words landed like a punch. "Not personal." Bianca had planned this, had chosen to leave me out to keep her perfect picture intact. I forced a smile, my nails digging into my palms. "Thanks for letting me know." I managed my voice steady despite the anger simmering inside. Clara beamed oblivious and prattled on about the wedding flowers, but I barely heard her. My mind was spinning, piecing together the deliberate cruelty of it all. I excused myself, murmuring something about needing the restroom, and wove through the crowd, my heart racing. As I passed a dessert table, I overheard two women talking, their voices low but clear. "Did you see her face when Bianca said that?" one said, giggling, like she thought she was one of us. The other laughed, sharp and mean. James should have known better than to bring her into this family. I froze my breath, catching. The words cut deeper than I expected, slicing through the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. I wanted to turn around to confront them, but my feet carried me forward toward the hallway again. The air felt thick, suffocating, and I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to calm the panic rising inside me. Was this what James's family thought of me? Was this what he thought? Deep down, I reached the hallway and leaned against the wall, my eyes stinging. I thought of my mom, how she'd always told me to hold my head high, even when the world tried to push me down. She'd raised me in a small house with creaky floors and a leaky roof, but it was full of love, full of her strength. I missed her so much, it ached. If she were here, she'd know what to say, how to navigate this mess. But she wasn't, and I felt so alone. I pulled out the napkin again, rereading Ellie's note. 9 o'clock was still an hour away, but it gave me something to hold on to, a flicker of purpose. I straightened, wiping my eyes, and decided to go back inside to face the room one more time. I couldn't let them see me break. Not yet. But as I stepped toward the banquet hall, I caught sight of Bianca across the room, her head thrown back in laughter, her hand resting on James's arm. The ease between them, the way he smiled at her, hit me like a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. My resolve hardened, but so did the ache in my chest. Something was shifting inside me, a quiet anger mixing with the hurt. I didn't know what Ellie had in mind, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let Bianca's cruelty define me. Not tonight. Not ever. I took a deep breath and walked back into the light, my heart heavy, but my steps firm, ready to face whatever came next. I stepped back into the banquet hall, Ellie's napkin tucked deep in my purse, my resolve a fragile shield. The room pulsed with chatter and clinking glasses, but it felt like I was moving through water, every step heavy. I scanned for my wobbly chair by the wall, hoping to disappear again. But a server directed me to a new spot. A folding table squeezed between the kitchen doors and a service cart. It was even farther from James, who sat at the head table, his laughter ringing out as he toasted with Bianca. My chest tightened, but I sat smoothing my dress, trying to hold on to the defiance I'd felt moments ago. The dinner was in full swing now, plates of seared salmon and roasted vegetables circulating the air, thick with the scent of rosemary and wine. I picked at my food, my appetite gone, my eyes darting to the head table. Bianca was radiant, her white dress catching the chandelier light, her every gesture commanding attention. I hated how effortlessly she owned the room, how she made my presence feel like a mistake. A hush fell as Evelyn, Bianca's mother, stood to give a toast. Her silver gown shimmered, her voice smooth and commanding. To our family, she began, raising her glass, a legacy of strength, elegance, and unity. Tonight, we celebrate Bianca, the heart of our tradition, and welcome Nathan into our fold. The room erupted in applause, but I felt a chill. Not a single mention of me, not even a glance in my direction. Guests turned to clink glasses, but some caught my eye, their smiles tight, almost mocking. My face burned, the isolation sinking deeper. I tried to focus on my plate, but Aunt Clara appeared again, her perfume sharp and floral. She slid into the chair beside me, her smile softer this time, like she was on a mission to comfort the outcast. "Hannah, you're holding up so well," she said, her voice low. "This must be overwhelming for you." I forced a nod, my jaw tight. overwhelming didn't cover it. Bianca's always been particular. Clara went on, patting my arm. She told the planner to keep the tables exclusive, to avoid any awkwardness. I'm sure she didn't mean to hurt you. Her words were meant to soothe, but they sliced through me. Bianca hadn't just forgotten me. She'd orchestrated this exclusion, framing it as some elegant choice. I gripped my fork, my knuckles white. She didn't mean to hurt me. I repeated, my voice low, barely hiding the edge. Clara blinked, startled, then laughed nervously. Oh dear, don't take it to heart. It's just how things are done in this family. She stood, brushing off the moment, and rejoined the crowd, leaving me to stew in her careless revelation. I looked at James again, hoping for a sign he'd noticed my absence, but he was deep in conversation with Bianca, their heads close, her hand brushing his sleeve. The sight twisted something raw inside me. I'd always known they were close, raised in this world of wealth and expectation, but seeing him so comfortable while I was sidelined felt like a betrayal I couldn't name. I remembered our wedding, small and simple, how he'd promised to build a life with me, not pull me into this cold, glittering machine. Where was that promise now? A guest at a nearby table, a man with a loud laugh and too much cologne, stumbled over a glass of red wine sloshing in his hand. Oops, he said, as the wine splashed across my dress, staining the pale blue fabric. I gasped, standing my napkin useless against the spreading red. No big deal, he slurred, grinning. It's just a dress, right? Before I could respond, Bianca's voice cut through the hum of the room. That's why we don't mix cheap fabrics with fine dining, she called from the head table, her tone playful but sharp. The room tittered a ripple of laughter that felt like 1,000 needles. I stood frozen, the stain seeping into my dress, my dignity bleeding out with it. I wanted to run to hide, but my feet wouldn't move. I sat back down, my hands shaking, and stared at the tablecloth, willing myself not to cry. The laughter faded, but the weight of their eyes lingered, judging, dismissing. I thought of my mom, how she'd faced worse, losing her job, raising me alone, and never let it break her. But this was different. This wasn't just rejection. It was a calculated effort to erase me. And James, the one person who should have had my back, was laughing with the woman who'd engineered it. I glanced at my watch. It was almost 9 time to meet Ellie. Her note was the only thing keeping me grounded, a faint promise of something real in this sea of pretense. But as I stood to slip away, I caught Bianca's eye across the room. She was watching me, her smile tight, like she knew I was breaking. The air between us crackled with something unspoken, and I felt a surge of anger so fierce it scared me. This wasn't over. Bianca's gaze held mine for a moment, her smile a blade wrapped in silk, before she turned back to her guests, dismissing me without a word. I forced my legs to move, weaving through the crowd toward the back exit, my stained dress clinging to my thighs. The wine's sharp scent mixed with my shame, and every step felt like wading through judgment. I needed to find Ellie to grasp the lifeline she'd offered, but the weight of the room clung to me, slowing my escape. As I passed the dessert table, a woman's voice stopped me. "Hannah, right?" she said, her tone curious but edged. I turned to see Sheila, a distant cousin of James's, her sleek bob and emerald earrings screaming wealth. She leaned against the table, a glass of champagne in hand, her eyes scanning me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "How do you handle this family's intensity?" she asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It wasn't kindness. It was probing, like she was testing how much I could take. I swallowed, my throat dry. "It's a lot," I said, trying to keep my voice even, but the words felt hollow. Sheila tilted her head, studying the stain on my dress. "You're tougher than you look," she said. But there was a bite to it, like she was daring me to prove her wrong. Before I could respond, she drifted back to her group, leaving me standing there, exposed. Her question echoed in my head, mocking me. Handle it! I was barely holding myself together. I pushed forward the kitchen doors just ahead, but the crowd seemed to thicken bodies, closing in their laughter louder, sharper. I caught snippets of conversation, Bianca's charm, Nathan's pedigree, the perfect wedding, and not one mention of me. It was like I didn't exist, like my 3 years with James meant nothing to these people. My chest ached, a deep, hollow pain that made it hard to breathe. I thought of our first date, how James had held my hand across a diner table, promising a future where we'd face everything together. Where was he now? I glanced back at the head table, hoping to catch his eye, but he was engrossed in a story Bianca was telling. Her hands animated, her laugh infectious. He nodded along, his face lit up, and for a moment I saw the boy. He'd been the one who'd grown up in her shadow, always chasing her approval. The realization hit me like a wave. He wasn't just ignoring my pain. He was choosing her world over mine. The man I'd married, who'd sworn to put me first, was slipping away, and I couldn't reach him. My eyes burned, but I blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. I was almost at the exit when a hand grazed my arm. It was a guest, an older man with a ruddy face, his breath heavy with whiskey. "You're James's wife, aren't you?" he said too loud, drawing eyes. I nodded, bracing myself. "Quite a family you've married into," he said, chuckling. "Bianca's the star, always has been. Must be tough keeping up." He clapped my shoulder like it was a joke, but the words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last. I mumbled something polite and pulled away, my heart racing. The exit was in sight, but the room felt like it was closing in, the chandeliers too bright, the voices too sharp. I thought of my mom again, how she'd faced whispers and judgment when she worked double shifts to keep us afloat. She'd always said, "They can't take your worth unless you give it to them." But here in this glittering cage, I felt like I was losing pieces of myself with every step. I reached the back exit and pushed the door open, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. The alley was dim, lined with trash bins and crates, a stark contrast to the opulence inside. I leaned against the wall, my breath shaky, and checked my watch. 9 o'clock. Where was Ellie? I pulled out her napkin, rereading her words, clinging to the hope she'd show. But as the seconds ticked by, doubt crept in. What if she'd changed her mind? What if this was another trap, another way to make me feel small? Footsteps echoed, and I tensed, but it was just a busboy hauling a trash bag, his eyes barely meeting mine. I sank to the ground, my dress catching on the rough pavement, and buried my face in my hands. The anger I'd felt earlier was still there, but it was drowning in something heavier. Grief, betrayal, the crushing sense that I didn't belong. Not in this family, maybe, not even in my own marriage. Bianca's laughter, James's silence, Sheila's probing the guests' careless words, they swirled in my head, each one a reminder of how alone I was. I heard the door creak and my head snapped up, my heart pounding. Was it Ellie, or had Bianca followed me, ready to twist the knife deeper? The uncertainty gripped me, and I realized I wasn't just hurt. I was terrified of what came next. The alley door swung open, and Ellie stepped out. Her server's apron gone, her face tense but determined. I scrambled to my feet, the pavement scraping my knees through my ruined dress. "You came?" I whispered, my voice shaky with relief. She nodded, glancing over her shoulder. "We don't have long," she said, pulling me deeper into the shadows. Her hands fumbled with her phone, and she thrust it toward me. "Listen to this." I recorded it earlier. My heart pounded as I pressed play, Bianca's voice crackling through the speaker, cold and deliberate. "Make sure Hannah's left out. No place card, no acknowledgement. She's not one of us. A man's voice, the event planners murmured agreement. The recording cut off, but the words echoed, each one a hammer against my chest. I stared at Ellie, my breath shallow. She planned it all. I said, my voice barely audible. Ellie nodded, her eyes fierce. I heard her in the kitchen giving orders like she was directing a play. I've seen her do this before to others, but you don't deserve it. Her words were a lifeline, but they also unleashed a flood of rage and hurt I'd been holding back. Bianca hadn't just humiliated me. She'd scripted my erasure, and James had let it happen. I handed the phone back, my hands trembling. What do I do with this? I asked, my mind racing. Ellie's jaw tightened. That's up to you, but if you want to fight back, I'll help. Her offer hung between us, heavy with possibility, but also danger. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and she slipped back inside, promising to find me later. I stood alone in the alley, the recording's weight sinking into me, a weapon I wasn't sure I could wield. The dinner was winding down, guests spilling into the cocktail hour in the adjacent lounge, a sleek space with velvet chairs and a gleaming bar. I slipped back inside my stained dress, drawing glances, but I kept my head high, Ellie's phone burning a hole in my purse. I found a corner near the bar, half hidden by a potted fern, and tried to steady myself. The room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but it felt like a stage, everyone playing their part in Bianca's perfect world. I scanned for James, hoping he'd seek me out, but he was nowhere in sight. A screen flickered to life at the front of the lounge, and Bianca's voice rang out bright and commanding. Everyone gather round. We've got a little surprise. My stomach dropped as guests crowded closer, their faces lit with anticipation. The slideshow began, a parade of family memories, Bianca and James as kids splashing in a lake, their parents at galas dripping in jewels, Bianca graduating, her smile radiant. Each image was a reminder of their legacy, their world, and my absence from it. I gripped the edge of the bar, my nails digging into the wood, willing myself to stay calm. Then the tone shifted. Recent photos appeared, James and Bianca at a charity event, their arms linked, the family at a ski lodge laughing in the snow. I searched for myself, my heart sinking with each slide. I'd been at those events, standing just out of frame, smiling through my discomfort. But I wasn't there. Not a single trace of me, despite 3 years of marriage. The guests murmured, some glancing my way, their whispers sharp and knowing. My throat tightened, the air too thick to breathe. I wanted to run, to hide, but my feet were rooted. Then a new slide flashed up and the room fell silent. It was me, caught off guard at a family picnic last summer, my hair messy, my expression awkward, like I'd been startled mid-bite. The caption read, "The one who tried to fit in." Laughter erupted, loud and cruel, led by Bianca's high, tinkling giggle from the front. My face burned, my vision blurring as the room spun. This wasn't just exclusion. It was a public execution, every chuckle a blade in my heart. I looked for James, desperate for him to stand up to stop this, but he was near the screen, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. He shifted uncomfortably, his hands in his pockets. But he didn't move, didn't speak. His silence was louder than the laughter, a betrayal that cut deeper than Bianca's cruelty. I'd always thought he'd choose me, that our love was stronger than this family's poison. But there he stood, frozen, letting them tear me apart. A hand touched my arm, and I flinched, turning to see a man I vaguely recognized, Leo, James's quiet cousin, always on the edges of these gatherings. His eyes were kind, but shadowed, like he'd carried his own wounds. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice low. "She did this to me once too. Sabotaged my job, made me the family joke. You don't deserve this." His words were a small comfort, but they also fueled the fire inside me. Bianca didn't just hurt me. She preyed on anyone who didn't fit her mold. I nodded, unable to speak, my chest heaving. The laughter was dying down, but the damage was done. I felt raw, exposed, like every piece of me had been stripped away. Leo squeezed my arm and slipped back into the crowd, leaving me alone with my rage and heartbreak. I clutched my purse, Ellie's phone, inside and felt a spark of something dangerous, a need to make Bianca face what she'd done. The spark in my chest flickered, but it wasn't enough to pull me out of the quicksand of that moment. The slideshow faded, and the room shifted back to its cocktail hour hum, but the laughter lingered in my ears, a ghost that wouldn't leave. I stood by the bar, my hands gripping my purse, Ellie's phone, a silent weight inside. I wanted to act, to do something, but my body felt like it was made of glass, one wrong move from shattering. Guests milled around, their voices a dull roar, their glances slicing through me like I was a spectacle they couldn't resist. I scanned the lounge, searching for a way out, when my eyes landed on a small table near the entrance covered in a guest book and a scattering of pens. It was meant for well wishes, a keepsake for Bianca and Nathan. I drifted toward it, drawn by some instinct I couldn't name, hoping for a moment of quiet. But as I flipped through the pages, my breath caught. Scrawled in sharp, looping handwriting was a single line. "Who's the nobody in the blue dress?" No signature. Just those words, bold and cruel, staring up at me. My fingers trembled, and I snapped the book shut, my heart hammering. It wasn't enough to mock me on a screen. Someone had taken the time to etch their disdain into this moment to make sure it lasted. I backed away, my vision blurring, and bumped into a woman in a sleek black dress, her perfume sharp and expensive. She turned her smile tight, and I recognized her as one of Bianca's friends from the head table. "Careful, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're looking a bit unsteady." Her eyes flicked to my stained dress, then back to my face, and she smirked before gliding away. The room seemed to tilt the walls, closing in every whisper and glance, a reminder that I was the outsider, the joke, the flaw in their perfect picture. I needed to find James, to force him to see what was happening, but he was still near the front now, chatting with Nathan, his face relaxed like the slideshow hadn't just torn me apart. I started toward him, my steps unsteady, when Bianca appeared in my path, her white dress glowing under the lights, her smile as polished as ever. "Hannah," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "You're not enjoying yourself, are you?" The words were soft, but they carried a venom that made my skin crawl. She stepped closer, her eyes glittering with something dangerous. "This family isn't for everyone," she said. "You should know that by now." I opened my mouth, my voice catching, but before I could speak, she leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "You're not family, Hannah," she whispered. "You're James's phase, and phases pass." Her words were a knife, precise and deep, cutting through every hope I'd clung to. She pulled back, her smile serene, and turned to greet a guest, leaving me frozen, the air sucked out of my lungs. The room spun, the chatter and clinking glasses fading into a dull hum. I felt like I was falling, like the ground had vanished beneath me. I stumbled toward a side door, desperate for air, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the handle. The hallway was dim, lined with framed photos of the venue's history, but all I could see was Bianca's face, her words looping in my head. A phase. Was that what James thought too? Was that why he'd stood there silent while his family laughed? I pressed my back against the wall, my chest heaving, and slid to the floor, my dress pooling around me. The recording in my purse felt like a bomb, but I didn't know if I had the strength to use it, not when everything I'd built with James felt like it was crumbling. Footsteps approached, and I looked up, my heart racing. It was Ellie, her face pale, her eyes wide with urgency. "Hannah." "I saw what happened," she said, crouching beside me. "I've got something else, another recording from tonight. It's worse." She held out her phone, her hand trembling, and I stared at it, my mind reeling. Worse, how could anything be worse than this? I reached for the phone, my fingers numb, but before I could listen, the door swung open and Bianca's silhouette filled the frame, her presence a storm cloud. "What's this?" she said, her voice sharp, her eyes narrowing as she looked from Ellie to me. My heart stopped the world narrowing to the weight of her gaze and the phone in my hand. Bianca's silhouette loomed in the doorway, her eyes sharp as knives pinning me and Ellie to the spot. My heart thundered Ellie's phone heavy in my hand, the promise of another recording burning through me. "What's this?" Bianca repeated, stepping closer, her voice low but laced with menace. I stood my legs unsteady and slipped the phone into my purse, my fingers brushing against the first recording. Ellie froze her breath quick, but I met Bianca's gaze, something inside me hardening. Nothing I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Just catching some air. Bianca's smile twitched skeptical, but a guest called her name from the lounge, and she turned, throwing a final glance that promised this wasn't over. Ellie exhaled, grabbing my arm. "We need to move," she whispered, pulling me down the hallway. We ducked into a small staff room, cluttered with folded linens and a flickering bulb. My mind raced Bianca's whisper, "You're James's phase still clawing at me." But the recordings, Ellie's defiance, Leo's confession, they were kindling, sparking a fire I hadn't known I could feel. I wasn't ready to crumble anymore. I wanted her to face what she'd done, not just to me, but to everyone she'd trampled. Ellie locked the door and turned to me, her eyes fierce. "The new recording, it's Bianca telling Nathan she doesn't care if you're hurt as long as you're out of the picture for good. I got it during the cocktail hour." My stomach twisted, the betrayal sinking deeper, but it also sharpened my resolve. "I want to use it," I said, my voice low but firm. "Both recordings. At the wedding tomorrow. Everyone needs to hear who she really is." Ellie nodded, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "It's risky," she said. Her family's vicious when cornered. "You sure?" I wasn't sure, not completely. The thought of standing up in front of hundreds of guests, exposing Bianca, made my palms sweat. What if they turned on me? What if James did? But then I thought of my mom, how she'd faced down landlords and bosses with nothing but her grit. She'd taught me to stand tall, even when my knees shook. I'm sure I said the words anchoring me. But I need a plan. Something clean, not petty. I want them to see her, not just hate me. Ellie's face lit up like she'd been waiting for this. "The reception's got an AV system for speeches and videos. I know the tech guy, Sam. He's fed up with Bianca's tantrums. I can get him to help." I nodded, my mind spinning with possibilities. A public reveal during the toasts, where Bianca's own words would undo her. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about truth, about refusing to be erased. But I needed more than just the recordings. I needed to speak, to frame it right, to show I wasn't just lashing out. We sat on a stack of tablecloths, the room's hum, a faint shield from the party outside. I pulled a notepad from my purse, my hands still trembling, but purposeful. "I'll write a speech," I said, scribbling notes. Short, clear. About respect, about what family should mean. "Then we play the recordings." Ellie watched, her fingers tapping nervously. "You're braver than I'd be," she said, "but you've got to be ready for fallout. Her mom, Evelyn, won't take this lying down." I paused, the pen hovering. Evelyn's toast, Her icy elegance flashed in my mind. She'd built this family's image, and I was about to crack it open. The risk was real, losing James, alienating everyone, but staying silent felt like losing myself. I kept writing my words simple but raw, drawn from the ache of the past few hours. I thought of Leo sidelined like me, and Ellie stuck in a job where Bianca's cruelty was just another day. This wasn't just for me anymore. The door rattled, and we both froze. Hannah James's voice came through muffled but urgent. My heart lurched. Ellie mouthed, "What now?" I stood smoothing my dress, the notepad clutched tight. If I faced him now, I'd have to lie or worse, spill everything before I was ready. But his voice, softer than it had been all night, tugged at me, stirring memories of the man I'd fallen for. I took a breath, my resolve wavering but holding. "Stay quiet," I whispered to Ellie and opened the door a crack, my heart pounding with what I'd have to say. I cracked the door open just enough to see James's face, his eyes shadowed with worry. "Hannah, where have you been?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. My heart twisted, caught between the man I loved and the one who'd let me drown in his family's cruelty. Ellie shifted behind me, silent but tense, her presence a reminder of the plan taking shape. I gripped the notepad, my speech half-written, and forced my voice to stay calm. "I needed space," I said, my words clipped. "It's been a rough night." James frowned, stepping closer, his hand brushing the doorframe. "I saw the slideshow," he said, his tone heavy. "I didn't know she'd do that." "I'm sorry." His apology felt like a crumb too small, too late. I wanted to believe him, to fall into the comfort of his arms, but the memory of his silence during Bianca's mockery held me back. "You didn't stop it," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "You let them laugh, James. You let her make me nothing." He flinched, his jaw tightening. "It's not that simple," he said. "Bianca's my sister, and this is her wedding. I didn't want to make a scene." My chest burned, his words echoing the same excuse he'd given at dinner. A scene. As if my pain was an inconvenience, a disruption to their perfect day. I thought of my mom, how she'd once told me, love wasn't just words, it was action standing up when it mattered. James hadn't stood up, not once. I took a breath, my resolve solidifying. "I'm not making a scene either," I said, my voice low but firm. "But I'm done being invisible. We'll talk later." I shut the door before he could respond, my heart pounding. Ellie stared at me wide-eyed. "That was intense," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my hands trembling as I sank back onto the tablecloths. Closing the door on James felt like closing a chapter one I wasn't sure I could reopen. I flipped open the notepad, my pen moving faster now, the words pouring out. "Let's finish this," I said, my voice steadier. Ellie pulled a USB drive from her pocket, her fingers quick as she explained. "Sam's ready to load the recordings into the AV system tomorrow. We just need your speech to set it up." I nodded, scribbling lines about dignity, about the cost of cruelty, about what it means to truly belong. Each word felt like a brick building, something stronger than the shame I'd carried all night. Ellie watched, her nervousness fading into something like respect. "You're not just doing this for you, are you?" she asked. I paused, the pen hovering. She was right. This was for Leo, whose dreams Bianca had crushed. For Ellie, trapped in a job where her worth was dismissed. For every person Bianca had made feel small. "No," I said, my voice soft but certain. "It's for all of us." We worked in silence, the staff room's hum a cocoon around us. I thought of a guest room I'd passed earlier, where I'd glimpsed a small leather journal on a dresser, its pages worn and yellowed. I'd peeked inside curious and found Bianca's handwriting, young and unguarded, confessing fears of never measuring up to her family's expectations. It had humanized her for a moment, but it also sharpened my purpose. She'd built her confidence on others' pain, and that wasn't strength, it was cowardice. My speech would call that out not with venom, but with truth. A knock interrupted us, and Ellie cracked the door, revealing Rachel, the wedding planner, her face all business. "Sam's in," she said, her voice low. "But we've got a problem. Evelyn's been sniffing around asking about disruptions. She's got eyes everywhere." My stomach clenched. Evelyn, with her polished grace and iron grip on the family, was a bigger threat than Bianca. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "We'll be careful," I said. "But we're doing this." Rachel studied me, her lips pursing, then nodded. "You've got guts, Hannah. I'll make sure the AV booth is clear during the toasts." She slipped out, leaving us to finish. I wrote the final lines of my speech, my hands steady now, each word a step toward reclaiming my voice. Ellie edited the recordings on her phone, trimming them to hit hard and fast. The plan was simple, but bold. I'd speak, the recordings would play, and Bianca's mask would fall. No theatrics, just the weight of her own words. As we wrapped up, I stood smoothing my stained dress, the notepad tucked into my purse. Ellie handed me the USB, her eyes steady. "You're ready," she said. I nodded, a quiet strength settling in my bones. I thought of my mom's voice, steady and clear. "Stand up, but stay true." I was standing up not for revenge, but for the truth I deserved. I stepped into the hallway, the noise of the party distant, and paused, my hand on the wall. My reflection flickered in a nearby mirror, my eyes fierce, my shoulders squared. I didn't say a word, but the look in my eyes said everything. I was done being small. The reception hall glowed with soft candlelight, the air thick with the scent of lilies and champagne. I stood at the microphone, my hands steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. The crowd of 300 guests hushed, their faces a blur of silk dresses and tailored suits. I'd just finished my speech, my voice calm but unyielding, about respect, about the invisible wounds we carry. Sometimes, I said, the truth needs a voice. I nodded to Sam in the AV booth, and the recordings began. Bianca's voice filled the room, cold and deliberate. "Make sure Hannah's left out. She's not one of us." Then the second clip, her dismissal to Nathan. "I don't care if she's hurt as long as she's gone." A gasp rippled through the crowd, sharp and jagged. Bianca, radiant in her wedding gown, froze at the head table, her wine glass halfway to her lips, her face draining of color. Nathan beside her stared at the speakers, his jaw slack, betrayal flickering in his eyes. I stood tall, my stained dress a badge, now not a shame, but my heart raced, waiting for the room to erupt. Instead, a heavy silence fell, the kind that presses against your skin, broken only by the faint clink of a fork dropping onto a plate. Evelyn shot to her feet, her silver gown catching the light, her eyes blazing as she stormed toward the AV booth. "Turn it off," she hissed, but Rachel, stationed nearby, blocked her path, her posture firm. "Let it finish," Rachel said, her voice low but commanding. The recordings looped Bianca's cruelty, echoing each word, a crack in the family's polished facade. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering, others staring at Bianca, their smiles gone. A woman in a navy dress covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. A man near the back shook his head, muttering to his wife. I stepped back from the microphone, my legs trembling, and scanned for James. He sat at the head table, his face pale, his hands clenched on the tablecloth. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something, regret maybe, or shame, but he looked away, his shoulders hunching. The weight of his silence settled in my chest, heavier than ever. I'd hoped foolishly that he'd stand up, that this would wake him. but he didn't move, and that hurt more than the crowd's stares. Nathan stood his chair, scraping loudly, and turned to Bianca, his voice low, but audible in the stunned quiet. "You said that," he asked, his tone raw, like he was seeing her for the first time. Bianca's lips parted, but no words came. She reached for his hand, but he pulled back, his face hardening. The room watched breathless as their perfect image cracked. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was a hollow ache, the cost of this truth sinking in. A guest near the front, a man with a booming voice, broke the silence. "This is petty," he called, his tone sharp. "Ruining a wedding for a grudge?" A few nodded, their murmurs rising, a tide of judgment turning toward me. My throat tightened, but then Clara, her silver hair gleaming, stood, her voice trembling but clear. "No," she said. "This is courage. I've seen this family hurt people for years. It's time someone spoke." Her words hung in the air, a small shield, and I caught Leo's eye across the room. His nod subtle but steady. The recordings stopped the silence, deafening now. Bianca's eyes found mine, not with anger, but with something worse, fear raw and exposed. I'd stripped her mask, and the room saw it. But the victory tasted bitter. Guests began to whisper, some defending Bianca, calling her stressed, others siding with Clara, their voices a low hum of division. A young girl, maybe 10, slipped through the crowd and tugged at my dress, her eyes wide. "Why's everyone mad?" she asked, her voice small. I knelt, forcing a smile. Sometimes people need to hear the truth. I said, my voice soft, but inside, I was unraveling. I stood, my hands clammy, and moved toward the side of the room, needing space. The crowd parted their eyes, following me, some curious, some hostile. I felt exposed, like I'd bared my soul, and now had to face the fallout. Ellie appeared at my side, her face pale but fierce. "You did it," she whispered, guiding me toward a quiet corner. But as we moved, I heard Evelyn's voice, sharp and commanding, addressing the crowd. "This is a misunderstanding," she began, her tone smooth, already spinning the narrative. My heart sank, the room's energy shifting, and I realized this wasn't over. The truth was out, but the battle was just beginning. Ellie's whisper barely reached me, as Evelyn's voice carried on, weaving a story of stress and misunderstanding to smooth over the cracks I'd exposed. The reception hall felt smaller now, the candlelight dimmer, the air heavy with unspoken judgments. I stood in the corner, my back pressed against a velvet curtain, Ellie's hand light on my arm. The crowd's murmurs grew, some nodding at Evelyn's words, others glancing at Bianca, who sat rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Nathan hadn't returned to her side, his absence a silent accusation that hung over the room. I wanted to feel strong, to hold on to the fire that had driven me to the microphone, but my chest ached with a quiet, creeping doubt. Had I gone too far? The girl's question, "Why's everyone mad?" echoed in my mind, her innocent eyes a mirror to the chaos I'd unleashed. I scanned the faces around me, searching for allies, but most avoided my gaze, their expressions a mix of discomfort and disapproval. A woman in a gold dress muttered to her husband. She could have handled this privately. Her words stung, a reminder that truth didn't always win hearts. Leo caught my eye from across the room, his face soft with understanding, but even his support felt distant, like a light I couldn't reach. Clara, still standing near her table, gave me a small, encouraging nod, but it wasn't enough to counter the weight of the room's shifting tide. I turned to Ellie, her jaw tight, her eyes darting between me and the crowd. "They're closing ranks," she whispered, her voice low. "Evelyn's good at this." I nodded, my throat dry, the reality sinking in. I'd shaken their world, but they were already rebuilding it brick by brick, with me on the outside. A server passed his tray rattling with empty glasses, and I caught his glance, quick, pitying, gone in a blink. It was a small thing, but it cut deep, another reminder of how I looked to them, the outsider who dared to speak. I thought of my mom, how she'd faced judgment with a quiet smile, never letting it dim her light. But I wasn't her. Not tonight. My light felt like it was flickering, the cost of my stand heavier than I'd expected. I moved toward the exit, needing air, my steps slow, deliberate. The crowd parted their whispers, trailing me like shadows. A man I didn't know, his tie loosened, raised his glass as I passed. "Bold move," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes held a flicker of respect. It was the smallest gesture, but it grounded me, a reminder that not everyone was against me. Still, it wasn't enough to lift the ache in my chest, the sense that I'd traded one kind of isolation for another. As I reached the double doors, I heard footsteps behind me, quick and purposeful. I turned, hoping for James, but it was Rachel, her face grim. "You need to go," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Evelyn's talking about consequences. She's not letting this slide." My stomach twisted, the word consequences sharp and cold. I nodded, my hands clenching my purse, the USB inside a silent reminder of what I'd done. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely audible. Rachel squeezed my arm, then disappeared back into the crowd, her warning lingering like smoke. I pushed through the doors into the cool night, the estate's gardens stretching out before me, dark and quiet. Ellie followed, her presence steady but silent. We stopped by a stone bench, the moonlight casting long shadows across the lawn. I sank onto the bench, my dress catching on the rough surface, and stared at my hands, the weight of the night pressing down. Did I do the right thing? I asked, my voice small, not expecting an answer. Ellie sat beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. "You spoke the truth," she said. "That's never wrong." Her words were kind, but they didn't ease the hollow feeling inside. I thought of James, his hunched shoulders, his silence. I'd wanted him to see Bianca's cruelty, to choose me, but all I saw was his absence. The crowd's whispers, Evelyn's control, Nathan's shock, they swirled in my mind, a storm I couldn't escape. I'd stood up just like my mom taught me, but the cost was a loneliness I hadn't expected, a quiet so deep it swallowed everything else. I looked out at the dark garden, my breath shallow, and felt the world still heavy with the truth I'd set free, and the price I was only beginning to understand. A week had passed since the wedding, and I sat on the couch in my small apartment, the afternoon light filtering through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the hardwood floor. The space felt different now, quieter, like it was holding its breath. A few cardboard boxes lined the wall, half packed with books and clothes, a question mark on my future. I held a steaming mug of chamomile tea, its warmth grounding me as I flipped open my journal. The pages filled with messy thoughts from the past few days. I'd been writing a lot, trying to make sense of the storm I'd walked through. The reception felt like a lifetime ago, but its echoes lingered, the stunned faces, Evelyn's calculated recovery, James's silence. I'd left that night with Ellie, her beat-up sedan carrying us through the dark, the radio playing low. She'd dropped me off here, promising to check in, and I'd stood in my doorway, the weight of what I'd done settling like dust. I hadn't spoken to James since, though his texts sat unanswered on my phone, each one a tug at a wound I wasn't ready to touch. I set the mug down and traced a finger over my journal's latest entry, written at dawn after a sleepless night. "I'm not the same Hannah," I'd scrawled, the words raw but true. The woman who'd walked into that rehearsal dinner clutching a gift and a fragile hope was gone. In her place was someone new, scarred, yes, but steadier, like a tree that had weathered a hurricane. I had stood up to Bianca, not with screams or tears, but with a truth that shifted the air. It wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to disappear. The doorbell buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Sarah, my best friend since college, holding 2 paper coffee cups and a bag of pastries. Her curly hair was tucked under a knit cap, her eyes sharp but warm. "Figured you could use some company," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invite. I smiled, the first real one in days, and took the coffee she offered. "You're a mind reader," I said, leading her to the couch. Sarah settled in, kicking off her boots, and studied the boxes. Planning a getaway, she asked, her tone light, but probing. I shrugged, sipping the coffee, its bitterness grounding me. "Maybe," I said. "There's a teaching job in Portland. Better pay, smaller school." "I'm thinking about it." She raised an eyebrow, unpacking a croissant and tearing off a piece. "Running or starting fresh?" she asked, her bluntness familiar, comforting. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the question hanging between us. "Starting fresh," I said, finally. "Running's what I did before swallowing the hurt to keep the peace. I'm done with that." Sarah nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Good," she said. "But you've got to deal with James first. He's part of this, whether you like it or not." Her words were a gentle prod, but they stung, stirring the ache I'd been avoiding. I set my coffee down, my fingers tracing the journal's edge. "He texted," I admitted, my voice low. "Wants to talk. Says he's sorry, but it's the same sorry he gave at the dinner. I don't know if I can trust it." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You don't have to trust it yet," she said. "But you've got to face him, Hannah. You stood up to Bianca. You can handle this." Her confidence in me was a quiet gift, one I hadn't realized I needed. I nodded, the weight of her words settling in. Facing James meant facing the cracks in our marriage, the ones I'd ignored for too long. I thought of my mom, how she'd rebuilt her life after my dad left, piece by piece, never rushing, but never stopping. She'd taught me that healing wasn't loud, it was deliberate, like planting seeds in hard soil. I wanted that, a life built on my terms, not shaped by someone else's cruelty or silence. The apartment was quiet, the only sound Sarah's soft chewing and the distant hum of traffic outside. I picked up my journal, flipping to a blank page, and wrote a single line, "I choose me." It was small, but it felt like a vow, a tether to the woman I was becoming. I closed the book and looked at Sarah, her presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. The light shifted, the stripes on the floor softening, and I took a slow breath, the world steady for the first time in days. Sarah left as the sun dipped low, the apartment sinking into a soft dusk. I stood at the window, watching the street below, where a neighbor walked her dog, its leash trailing lazily. The normalcy of it grounded me, a reminder that the world kept turning, even after everything. My journal lay open on the couch, its pages a map of the woman I was becoming. I'd written, "I choose me," and those words felt like a quiet revolution, not loud or defiant, but steady, like a river carving its path. The doorbell buzzed again, and my stomach tightened. I opened the door to find James, his coat rumpled, his eyes tired but searching. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low, almost fragile. I nodded, stepping aside, the air between us heavy with unsaid things. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped, while I leaned against the kitchen counter, needing the distance. "I messed up," he said, staring at the floor. "I should have stood up for you." I was scared, Hannah, scared of losing my family, of breaking things I couldn't fix. His words were honest, raw, but they didn't erase the ache of his silence that night. I crossed my arms, my voice calm but firm. "I needed you, James. Not your family, not their approval, you. and you weren't there." He winced, his shoulders slumping, and for the first time, I saw the weight he carried, the boy caught between his sister's shadow and his own choices. It softened me, but it didn't change what I needed. "I want to try," he said, looking up, his eyes pleading. "Counseling, anything. I love you." The words stirred memories of late-night talks, his laugh in our old diner booth, but love wasn't enough without trust. I thought of my mom, how she'd walked away from a marriage that dimmed her light, not with anger, but with quiet resolve. "I love you too," I said, my voice steady. "But I need time and boundaries. Your family can't come first anymore." He nodded, his face tight, and I saw a flicker of the man who'd promised me forever. But I also saw the work ahead. He left soon after the door clicking shut, leaving a silence that felt less heavy than before. I sat back on the couch, picking up my phone, and texted Ellie. "Thank you," I wrote. "You gave me courage. If you ever want out of that job, I'll help." Her reply came fast. "You gave me hope too. I'm applying to college." I smiled, a small warmth spreading through me. Helping her felt like planting a seed, like the ones my mom used to tend in our tiny backyard, patient and sure. I stood and walked to the boxes, pulling out a framed photo from our first year together. James and me at a county fair, cotton candy in hand. Our smiles wide and unburdened. I traced the glass, the memory bittersweet but not painful. I set it on the shelf, not hidden, but not central, a piece of my past I could carry without letting it define me. The apartment felt like mine now, not a battleground, but a place to rebuild. I opened my journal again, writing slowly, each word deliberate. "Healing isn't loud," I wrote. "It's choosing to keep going, even when the path is foggy." I closed the book, my fingers lingering on its cover, and looked out the window. The street was dark now, the neighbor and her dog gone, but a single street lamp glowed steady and soft. I breathed deeply, the air clean, my heart quiet. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could rest, not because everything was fixed, but because I was enough. 6 months later, I sat on a wooden bench in a small park near my new apartment in Portland, the air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. The city hummed softly around me, a gentle rhythm of dog walkers and joggers, their lives weaving through the morning mist. I held a thermos of coffee, its steam curling upward, and watched a group of kids chase each other across the grass, their laughter bright and unburdened. My life was quieter now, simpler, but it felt like mine, built from choices I'd made, not ones forced on me. I'd taken the teaching job, trading my old life for a fresh start. The school was small, tucked in a neighborhood of brick houses and corner cafes where my students greeted me with shy smiles and endless questions. Teaching grounded me, each lesson a chance to give what I'd needed at their age, someone who saw them, really saw them. I'd started running in the evenings, my sneakers pounding the trails, the rhythm of my breath, a reminder that I could keep going no matter what. James and I were in counseling meeting weekly over video calls, our conversations careful but honest. He'd moved out of his family's orbit, renting a place closer to his job, trying to untangle himself from their expectations. We weren't fixed, not yet, but we were building something new piece by piece. I'd set boundaries. His family was off limits unless they earned their way back. Evelyn had sent a stiff email claiming the wedding was a misstep, but I didn't reply. Bianca's apology came later, a handwritten note, brief but sincere. I kept it in a drawer, unanswered, a reminder that forgiveness was my choice, not my obligation. I thought of Ellie often now, thriving in her first semester of college, her texts full of excitement about late-night study sessions and new friends. We'd stayed in touch, our bond forged in that chaotic night. Leo, too, reached out, sharing updates about his new job, free from his family's shadow. Their growth mirrored mine's small victories that felt like sunlight after a long storm. I'd learned to hold space for others' healing, but also for my own, letting go of the need to fix everything. Mornings like this were my sanctuary. I'd walk to the park before work, my thermos in hand, and sit letting the world unfold. Today, a sparrow hopped nearby, pecking at crumbs, its tiny movements a quiet lesson in resilience. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness softened by a touch of cream, and felt a calm I hadn't known was possible. The weight of that wedding of Bianca's cruelty and James's silence hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined me. I was more than the woman who'd stood trembling at a microphone. I was Hannah, still learning, still growing, but whole. I pulled a small notebook from my bag, its pages filled with thoughts and sketches, a habit I'd picked up to quiet my mind. I jotted a few words: gratitude, patience, strength, not as goals, but as truths I was living. The kids' laughter faded as they ran farther, and I leaned back the bench, cool against my shoulders. The park felt like a pause, a moment to breathe before the day began, and I closed my eyes, letting the sounds of life wash over me, steady and sure. I opened my eyes, the park's soft hum pulling me back to the present. A breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the faint scent of rain, and I tucked my notebook away, its weight a quiet comfort in my bag. I stood, brushing off my jeans, and started walking the path that looped around the pond, my steps slow, deliberate. Each one felt like a choice not to erase the past, but to carry it differently. The wedding, the recordings, the silence, they were part of my story, but they weren't the whole of it. I'd learned to hold them lightly, like stones smoothed by a river, no longer sharp enough to cut. I passed an older woman on a bench, her hands folded over a book, her face calm as she watched the water. She nodded at me, a small gesture, but it felt like recognition, like she saw the quiet strength I'd fought to claim. I nodded back, my lips curving slightly, and kept walking. That night at the reception, I'd thought strength meant speaking out, letting the truth ring. But now, months later, I saw it differently. Strength was in the after, showing up for myself day by day, choosing who I wanted to be, not who others expected. I thought of the kids in my classroom, how their eyes lit up when I praised their small victories, how they trusted me to listen. I'd started sharing bits of my story with them, not the details, but the lessons, how it's okay to stumble, how your worth isn't tied to others' approval. Their questions, so honest and unguarded, reminded me of the girl I'd been craving, someone to say, "You're enough." I was becoming that voice for them, and in doing so, I was finding it for myself. The path curved, and I stopped by the pond, its surface rippling under the morning light. I thought of my mom, not her lessons this time, but her laughter, how it filled our old kitchen when we baked cookies, flour dusting our hands. She'd given me roots deep and steady that I was only now learning to trust. Standing there, I realized the deepest lesson wasn't about fighting or winning. It was about freedom, the kind that comes when you stop seeking permission to exist, when you choose compassion for others and yourself, even when it's hard. I'd forgiven James not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I'd let go of Bianca's cruelty, not to absolve her, but to free my heart from its grip. The truest victory was this moment, standing by a pond, my breath, even my soul, quiet. Life wasn't perfect. Counseling was hard, the future uncertain, but it was mine, shaped by my hands, my choices. I was no longer the woman who'd trembled in that banquet hall. I was Hannah whole, not because I'd won, but because I'd learned to live. I turned back toward the park's exit, the kids' laughter fading in the distance, the day stretching out before me. I felt light, not from forgetting, but from carrying only what mattered. The world was wide, and I was ready to meet it one step at a time. What's a moment that made you realize your own strength? The one that changed how you saw yourself? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding our way to healing, to being enough. Take care.